Welcome to the Solution Nation podcast. My name is Sean Snowday, and I'm the president of Solution Nation. Solution Nation is dedicated to providing a platform for investors to learn about Israel's most dynamic public and private companies. We interview lead venture capitalists, Wall Street analysts, investment bankers, and managers of incubators and accelerators. Today's title is the Israel-Brazil Innovation Ecosystem, and our guest is Marcia Zaytoun Jansen. Now, in this podcast, you'll learn about the history of the Israel-Brazil relationship. You will also gain insight into the current diplomatic, economic, and research relationships that the two countries enjoy. Today, we discuss how Brazil's pro-Palestinian Authority president affect relations between Israel and Brazil, and which of Brazil's industries are the most important to Israel. Please remember that all content provided on the Solution Nation podcast and website is for educational purposes only. Nothing shall be construed as investment advice. Investment decisions shall not be made based on information, written, verbal, or otherwise, posted or spoken on Solution Nation. Conduct your own research or consult with your own investment advisors before making investment decisions. So here's my good friend, the host of the show, and the CEO of Solution Nation, David Wanatik.
Hello, and welcome to Solution Nation. My name is David Wanatik. I'd like to thank you for joining our session today. The session, I'm sure, is going to be fascinating. It will focus on the Israel-Brazil innovation ecosystem. Speaking on this subject, I'm very pleased to introduce Marcia Zaytoun Jansen. Marcia is a senior business lawyer with a master's degree in corporate law from the University of Bonn. She has more than 25 years of work experience in Brazil, Germany, and Israel in the areas of corporate and international commercial contracts, financial technology, high-tech, finance, and banking. She has worked in-house for banks and at the International Department of Law Firms for areas of industry such as high-tech, chemical, insurance, oil and energy, import-export, maritime, engineering, printing, and others. She's fluent in English, German, Portuguese, Spanish, and Hebrew, and she's lived in Israel for more than the past 6 years. So she has a very impressive background, but I'll just give you the highlights of it, and we'll go right into the interview. Thank you for joining us, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And it's for me a pleasure to speak with you. And maybe something that came to my mind yesterday, suddenly before sleeping, I remember that I was in Germany in 2006 watching in a VIP cabin, and it was one of the final games in the World Cup. And this was something offered by Innovation Land Germany, Land of Innovation. And I took the catalog home, I got a gift, I put it in the shelf, and I didn't really understand what was the meaning of it. And 10 years later, I came to Israel, where we really breathe innovation, and where the word land of innovation would much more make sense if we would speak of Israel, of course, Germany also. But this is really, I'm very happy about your initiative of talking about innovation, and then especially in the case of Brazil. Thank you.
Yes. So before we talk about the Israel-Brazil innovation ecosystem, maybe just talk a little bit about the Jewish community in Brazil. So is there anything you'd like to say about the size of it, or the cities in which more of the Jews live in Brazil, or how they're treated in Brazil, how successful they are?
Yes, the Jewish population in Brazil today is around 120,000 Jews. 70% of it is in the middle and upper class, have at least one academical degree, and it's the 9th largest Jewish community in the world.
Okay.
So they live usually, the largest community is in São Paulo, than Rio. We have also in the south of Brazil, but less. There's also in the north, there are Jews. And maybe if we speak about the history of the Jews in Brazil, we will see where they are, why they are, and what happened from the beginning and the situation today.
Okay. Does the Jewish community in Brazil, they typically stick together? Is it a close community, or is there a lot of intermarriage in Brazil?
I would say until the 60s, 70s, maybe 80s, there was not so much intermarriage as today, but still there are many clubs. In Rio de Janeiro, there were already 3 clubs before I left Brazil. Many schools and synagogues. I come from Rio, but the largest community comes from São Paulo, where people, we see, in fact, that also here in Israel, the communities, the Brazilian Jews here from Brazil stick together.
Okay.
Especially the ones from São Paulo that are living in Ranana. And we definitely can say that the Jewish community is a community in Brazil.
Okay. I read that at least 10 years or so ago, Brazil was doing very well in terms of having low risk of anti-Semitism. It was a safe country. They scored very well compared to other countries. I'm not sure, is that still the case, or are there concerns about anti-Semitism?
Well, for sure, this is very relative. I felt better living in Germany as a Jew than in Brazil, honestly, because the Brazilians don't even feel when they are being anti-Semitic, because it's inside the mentality. They don't notice it. But I think in the last few years, there is an increase, definitely. That was not there before. Brazil was always considered to be a country without anti discrimination. I see this in a relative way, but no big problem. In the last years, yes, we hear about that.
So when you say that there's a little bit of sort of natural anti-Semitism inside of Brazilians, is that in the form of thinking that Jewish people are focused on money, or how does that come about? How does that manifest itself?
Well, as I say, it's in the DNA somehow. But I remember I was very, very young, and being in the apartment of a Jewish friend in my house, in the building, and we were watching about a war between Israel, probably Lebanon, and a neighbor came and said, "I hope all the Jews die in this war." And I was a teenager, and I asked her, "Do you know you were in a Jewish family's house now?" And she says, "Yes, but the priest said that to us at the church." Wow. So that's why when people say Brazil has no anti-Semitism, this is not my experience, unfortunately.
Okay. So I read that Brazil is home to the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East. Wow. So most of the Arabs in Brazil, I think, are Christian. But are there any tensions between the Arabs in Brazil and the Jewish community?
Well, I have the number more or less. There are 100 times more Arabs than Jews in Brazil, exactly 100 times. And I would say no tensions. I would say most of them, in fact, Christians. I would say no tensions. I cannot talk about today because I'm not there anymore, and this, we are having much more from the left, I would say, people talking about being anti-Israel because of the Palestinians and this kind of stuff. In this sense, maybe, but I wouldn't say that this is a big conflict.
Okay. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about the history of the Jewish community in Brazil, that would be fine.
There is really something very, very interesting about that I heard about, and now I got the confirmation because I researched. And in the boats that went to Brazil for the discovery, there was already a Jew. So he was called Gaspar de Lemos. He was originally from Poland, and he left Poland and went to different countries, including Egypt and India. In India, he met a Portuguese. He fled Poland because he didn't want to convert. And when he was asked to come to Portugal by this Portuguese navigator, he did it. He converted. And then he was in one of these boats that came to Brazil, discovered Brazil, and he came as a Christian and made a lot of fortune with that, which is in the very, very, very beginning, there were already Jews in Brazil, and after a while, and fleeing the Inquisition, some converted Jews came as Christians to Brazil, hoping to be able in Brazil to profess the religion in a secret way. The same that happened in Portugal with the Marranos, right? And they tried to have hidden synagogues to teach Torah, and somehow these people passed some traditions to their children and descendants. And today there is in Brazil an awareness that around 4 million Brazilians are descendants of these Jews. Wow. in the beginning. Yes, they are called Bnei Anozin, and they are now, some of them are even converting. I heard about 30,000 converting. In the 17th century, the Dutch conquered Brazil and ruled Brazil for some years, and then they brought the freedom of religion. In this case, about 1,500 Jews came and could open the first synagogue in Latin America. They had a rabbi, a cantor. But after some years, the Portuguese came again and promised that freedom of religion would continue, but didn't keep it. So the Jews were charged later with heresy. And in 1824, with the independence of Brazil, the freedom of religion was in the constitution. Okay. In this time, Moroccan Jews came because there was a boom of rubber, and they came to explore. They came to the north of Brazil, where there is still a little Moroccan Jewish community. And after that, around 100 years ago, with the First World War, Jews fled to Brazil, in general to America. This is also the case of my family. They came from Lebanon and Syria. They were also followed by Russian and Polish Jews who were fleeing pogroms and the Russian Revolution. Later, the Jews fled the Nazis and came. And finally the Jews who were persecuted in Arab countries after the creation of the State of Israel. So these were the big flows of Jews to Brazil. And this is the way the population came.
Okay. So during World War II and up, in that era, was the Brazilian policy towards Jewish refugees, was it welcoming or was it restricted?
I think from 1942, Brazil began to issue visa for Jews. There is a well-known story about among Brazilians in the Brazilian consulate in Hamburg, Germany. There was a couple, Araci and Guimarães Rosa. He was the consul, and they were facilitating German Jews to go to Brazil. And yes, definitely, there was a welcoming posture.
Okay.
And this would become even better later after the war.
Okay, good. So on the other side of that, after World War II, was Brazil welcoming, or did they even try to recruit some successful Nazi engineers? Was it a refuge for Nazis to go to Brazil?
I cannot say that it was a refuge for Nazis. Certainly, they also fled to Brazil, to Argentina, to Chile. We know about that. But I'm not so informed about these people.
Okay.
No, I cannot say so much about that. I'm sure they also came, but not that Brazil tried to attract them. Not
That's
in my information.
Good. That's a good distinction.
Yes.
Just a little bit of a digression, but some years ago I saw a movie about maybe it was Argentina, but right after World War II, there were lots of cities in South America which there were former Nazis and Jewish refugees living in the same city together. And they knew that they were former Nazis. The Jewish knew that these people are former Nazis, that not former Nazis knew these people are Jewish. It was an interesting movie about the tension of living peacefully together. They had to live peacefully together, but it must have been an interesting dynamic. Anyway, you mentioned a little bit the Brazilian community in Israel. Do you know how large it is and what cities they typically live in?
Yes, they are officially 14,500. They live in Ranana, especially, then also in Kfar Saba, Netanya, and lately many Brazilians are going to Harish. The center, the capital of Brazil and Israel is definitely Netanya with 400 families. Even I lived there for some months in the beginning. And at that time, there were 200 families, now 400. So the number of Brazilian Olim is increasing. And there is a Brazilian synagogue, rabbis who speak Portuguese, and they have activities. They are very welcoming. They connect themselves with the Jewish institutions in Brazil and send also people who are talking about Aliyah and trying to bring people here, definitely.
Okay, good. Maybe we can talk about the relationship between Israel and Brazil. In general, is the relationship strong between Israel and Brazil, or are there tensions? Does it depend on the political party that's in power in Brazil?
Let me tell you something. Brazil the UN was created after the Second World War, and when it moved from California to New York, the president of the UN was a Brazilian, and he put to vote the partition of the English mandate in Palestine. And this was something that interested him particularly. And at the same time that he put it to vote in the General Assembly, he also noted that it wouldn't be a positive result. So what did he do? He postponed the vote. This was possible because he was the president, and began to do one-on-one with different countries to convince them to vote in favor of the partition for both Israelis and Arabs. And we could say that Israel came to exist through the hands of Osvaldo Aranha. This is his name. There's a street here in Tel Aviv with his name, also in Jerusalem. And after that, there was the independence war in Israel, and immediately after, Brazil sent a diplomatic mission that was the precursor of the embassy that came then in 1953. Okay. So next year there will be 70 years of the Brazilian embassy in Israel. And
which is still in Tel Aviv. Still in Tel Aviv?
It is still in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
There was the still current president of Brazil promised to open the embassy in Jerusalem, but probably he got a lot of pressure. And what he did was to open an office of the International Trade Agency, APEX, in Jerusalem as a compromise, maybe one day. But you ask, how are the relations? Immediately, the countries begin to have very, very good, deep relations and signing agreements, bilateral agreements in diverse areas like cultural and technical, especially. And Brazil usually has lots of bilateral contract agreements with the Latin American countries, but a lot with Israel. And even Mercosur has an agreement with Israel. And in the last years, Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, who is a big fan of Israel, fan and friend of Israel, he's evangelic, so he has also a personal connection with the Jews and Israel. He visited the country, and during the visit, 5 bilateral agreements were signed in different areas. I have here defense, public health and medicine, public security and crime combat, cybersecurity, and what has to do with our subject, science and technology. So all these agreements were signed, and they are full of life. And also what Brazilian began to do, and is still in the process, but it is joining the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Okay. So Brazil is completely against any kind of antisemitism or discrimination, and in this sense, yes.
I read that there's laws in Brazil that make it illegal to say something anti-Semitic or write something anti-Semitic or put a swastika somewhere. Heard it was actually illegal to do that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I believe so. I can talk about Germany. It's definitely a problem. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe so.
So
But
yeah,
yes,
there was recently an election in Brazil, right? And Lula won the election, and he's more a friend of the Palestinian Authority than Israel. Is that correct?
he's a friend of the Palestinians, of the Iranians. He's a friend of Holocaust denier Ahmadinejad. But I was thinking about what to say. Nevertheless, when he's coming now for his third mandate. He's not a simple figure. Everybody knows he sat in prison for corruption, and this is not something easy. But he had in his first or second term the idea of approaching the Middle East in general, also the Arab countries with which Brazil has lots of trade. And in the frame of visits to the Middle East, he also visited Israel. So the visit was not easy, but he came, first of all. Then he didn't want to visit the tomb of Herzl. It was exactly the time of the anniversary of Herzl's death. He said, no, I'm not going. He went to Ramallah and put a wreath in what's his name?
Abbas?
Arafat. Tom. So, but there is something interesting about that one thing are the political parties. The other thing is the whole Congress in Brazil. And the other thing is how Brazil votes in the UN. The other thing is about the trade between the countries, because if the president likes Israel or not, the trade continues. As we said, Brazil has 100 more times more Arabs than Jews, but the trade, this doesn't disturb the trade. And also the Arab countries don't have a problem about this relationship.
Okay, so the Congress in Brazil is more supportive of Israel, or would you say that the Congress is usually, somewhat supportive of Israel, or is that not the case?
I cannot say exactly the Congress, but I can say how Brazil votes in the UN, for instance. Brazil votes traditionally according to its constitution. In paragraph 4, there are the principles that rule how should be the international relations of Brazil. And among these principles, we have, for instance, the prevalence of human rights. We have self-determination of the peoples, non-intervention, defense of peace, peaceful settlement of conflicts, repudiation of terrorism and racism.
Okay.
So in this sense, what I heard from the Brazilian ambassador here in Tel Aviv is that Brazil has a very balanced vote. It's not only pro-Israel, it's 1/3 pro-Israel with Israel, 1/3 also pro-Palestinian for their self-determination and state, etc. And 1/3 is abstentions.
Okay. I read a couple years ago the Israelis wanted to appoint an ambassador to Brazil, and that ambassador was a former leader of one of the settlements outside of the Green Line, and they didn't accept him. I'm not sure if they delayed the acceptance or never accepted him, but there was some tension there.
I think he was not accepted. It was the follower of Lula. Lula was 2 terms. And then his followers, same political party, Dilma Rousseff, she denied the entrance of this ambassador because he lived in the beyond the lines.
The territories, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So, all right. What should people know, Israelis or Europeans or Americans? What should we know if we go to Brazil? Any special customs we should be sensitive to, or any negotiating styles, or is it a formal culture, informal negotiating culture?
I would say Brazilians in general are known worldwide for being very informal people, very happy people. But doing business, there's a seriousness and there's, of course, formalities. I would say definitely there are differences between the cultures. Israelis are straight, fast, and want results immediately. Brazilians are much more approachable. They want more time for that. They have their own ways. In Brazil, it's very important to do business with Brazil. It's important to have a connection and to be present and things like that. I think this is something that is definitely missing, is a kind of workshops for the cultural differences between Brazil and Israel in business relations. Mm-hmm. This is something that could exist because, yes.
So as far as the time, are Brazilians punctual? And do they keep the meetings? If I say we'll have a meeting next Tuesday, will they generally keep the meeting, or is there some laxness to that?
I would say if it's private, everything can happen. If it's business, they keep the meetings. Definitely. This is the way I know them.
Okay.
100%.
Any other cultural issues? I think somebody told me like a woman's not supposed to put her purse on the floor. You're not supposed to put things on the floor. I don't know if that's true or not. No, you didn't hear that?
Nope.
Okay.
I never heard about that.
Okay. I remember like 20 years ago, I did some business in Chile, and at least at that time, it was normal, like, to kiss each other. Like, I'd go to a meeting and I was a secretary. It was okay. It was acceptable or expected. I'm not sure if that's changed over the last 20 years in COVID too, but in Brazil, is that, still part of the custom or not acceptable?
I think in Brazil, it's absolutely part of the culture to give kisses, to hug and everything. Also in business meetings, people are very warm, very open, and they wouldn't make a difference, I think, between Israelis and Brazilians or foreigners in general and Brazilians. I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Is it expected to give gifts when you meet each other in Brazil, like business partners, or? No?
I think, I had a business, not a business, a client coming to visit me in Germany who brought me a present. I never heard about this use, that it would be necessary, or no.
Okay.
I may be doing a mistake, but I'm maybe not the right person to answer this.
Just as far as formalities, do people typically address each other in a business setting by their first names or their surnames?
First name.
First names. Okay. Okay.
Except if the person is known by his second name, then yes. But then this is known somehow.
Okay.
But we also, in Brazil, all languages have their solution or their differences in this context. In English, you just have you. In Brazil, you have the you for people of your friends, your level, let's say, and then you have the older people or people who are more important than you, and then you have the other you, the
Okay.
você, tu, você, or senhor.
Okay.
This difference exists.
Like do or Z in German. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't
Okay.
want to talk about
Okay.
Germany
Okay.
again, but it's exactly. But also
Okay.
in French, the vous
Okay.
and tu, usted,
Okay.
tu, exactly. But they have different connotations. In Germany, the Z means I'm here, you're there. And in Brazil, it means it's vertical.
Okay.
The person is either older or you have to be more respectful than the person needs to be with you. This is
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So maybe we can talk about the economy and innovation a little bit. What does Brazil have that Israel needs? Does it have like resources, natural resources that Israel needs, or what does Israel need from Brazil?
well, Brazil is the second food provider in the world, and Brazil, when you see the trade list, the products, the statistics, what you see in first place are beef, mineral oil in the last time. I don't know if it's due to the crisis in Russia, soy, corn, coffee, fruit juices. And these are the main articles that Brazil exports. But there's also in a good position parts for the automobile and aviation industry.
Okay.
Brazil has in São Paulo, São José dos Campos, a hub for the Brazil has the third biggest airplanes constructor in the world. Mm-hmm. This was even for me a surprise, Embraer. And around this industry, it supplies civil aircrafts and military aircrafts in the world. And around this industry, there's a hub of 800 companies producing parts for them, and these parts are also sold to Israel.
Okay.
So it's a big amount of food and commodities, but also this important technical or industrialized element.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's concern in Brazil, especially among the cattlemen and the ranchers and people that produce beef and things like that. There's a lot of food technology in Israel that is, trying to approximate the protein that you get from beef. Is there any concern about that, or is that too far in the future? Or
I wouldn't say concern. There are lots of cooperation. There are 150 Israeli companies in the food industry in Brazil, cooperating or not with Brazilian companies. And there are also Brazilian companies here doing cooperation with Israeli companies. So from both sides, this is happening. The whole concerns and developments, all of that is definitely happening. The BRF, Brazilian very big meat company, made a partnership with Aleph Farms, for instance, and the Brazilian JBF, I think, bought here in Israel also a subsidiary, so they are working together a lot, and not only in meat production, also, for instance, orange juice with less sugar, And there are also
Okay.
partnerships between Israeli technology and the Brazilian production. So this is definitely happening, and it's very, very big in the moment.
So these Israeli companies that have operations in Brazil or have alliances in Brazil, anything you want to say about managing people, managing the workers in Brazil? Can you give them criticism? Can you be direct in telling somebody that they need to improve, or do you have to be very gentle and diplomatic about that? Or do they have a strong work culture, or do they have problems with coming in late or absenteeism?
No, I would say Brazilians are in general very polite, very gentle with each other. But again, business is business. It's a different culture, and I would say in this sense, you have to be straight, and Brazil is is accompanying the world in this whole development. Where we are now and where we were 20 years ago, it's not the same story, and Brazil is not stuck in what it was. So it's a country doing well, and in business you can say what needs to be. And
Okay.
it happened to me also when I lived in Brazil, and if I had to hear something, I heard, and so if I had to say, I said, and no, I don't think there is a problem here.
So
or something to be that is completely different.
okay. So there are some Brazilian Israelis that can go back to Brazil and help run companies there. So it wouldn't be a communication problem there. But in other situations where the Israelis have to communicate with the Brazilian managers and supervisors, how well do those people speak English?
I would say more and more. It's getting better and better.
Okay. Okay. All right. So
Definitely, you find in the market, you find lots of who will not speak, but you also find people who will speak
okay.
English.
Okay. And then what does Brazil look to Israel for? Which technologies does Brazil want to take out of Israel and use at home?
Mm-hmm. They are in part in this bilateral agreements. We heard about them already, and we are talking about defense tech, about agri-tech. This is maybe the most important. We can also talk about desert tech. This was already in the 60s, 70s in Brazil, because Brazil, you think of Brazil as a green country, but in the Northeast, we have a big area, arid states, that it's very similar to the desert. And already in the many years ago, we heard about Israeli technicians coming to help the growth in Brazil. So desert tech, defense tech, agri-tech, the blue tech, this is water management, water waste management. Yes, basically.
Okay. Is there a big problem?
I mean, also fintech. There are products that are more, but when we talk later about what is going on in research terms, we will see that things that don't come to the statistics, but there are other fields also.
Okay.
Space tech. And for instance, Brazil, Gilat Satellites delivers satellites and telecommunications in Brazil.
Okay.
And it's now beginning, it was chosen to deliver telecommunication to oil platforms of
Okay.
Petrobras.
Oh,
The
very good.
biggest. Yes, yes.
Okay.
But we have also Elbit in Brazil. We have the IAI and Rafael in Brazil.
Okay.
So there are
Okay.
some technology big companies that are already established there.
Okay. Is there a big problem with the water infrastructure in Brazil?
Brazil
Is
has
there,
water. Brazil has lots of water. We
but
have
it gets
lots
to
of
the people. There's a lot of very poor people in Brazil that don't have the basics, right?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that to you.
Okay.
I used to be in Brazil every year, and we hear about saving water. Of course, water is a resource, but if the net is enough, I cannot say. I say there is a partnership between an Israeli and Brazilian company in water management.
Mhm.
But if it's about the net, I cannot answer that.
So this is a little bit off of our topic, and if you don't know, that's okay. But I read and heard that the Chinese are very active in Brazil. I think they bought the media, like one of the big media companies, and there's a lot of Chinese programming on television in Brazil, and they bought up or at least have equity interests in a lot of the food companies and the land, maybe the ports. Anything you want to say about the Chinese influence in Brazil?
I know the same that you know, that they are coming, not only the Chinese, but I don't know exactly details about that.
Okay, that's fair
Sorry.
enough. Anyway, so as far as the research and development cooperation between Israel and Brazil, are there formal alliances from university to university that you want to talk about?
Yes, I researched about that and talked also with lots of people, including with the Secretary of Science, Technology and Innovation in the Brazilian Embassy. And I kind of divided some of the information of what's going on in terms of academy, between the universities, then between the companies, and also some bilateral projects. And definitely there is a lot going on between the universities. The current ambassador has been visiting all the biggest Israeli universities to check what exists in terms of technology and do matchmaking with universities in Brazil. So he was already at Tel Aviv University, Hebrew University, Weizmann Institute, Technion, Haifa University, wow, Ben Gurion, and Bar Ilan universities. All these universities, they have offices in São Paulo University in order to attract students and cooperation and do things together. And we have now 150 Brazilian students at Tel Aviv University.
Oh, that's a lot.
58 at Bar Ilan University. The Technion, I don't know how many students, but the Technion has even a Brazilian Technion society.
Oh.
And 4 Brazilian professors in the Technion a lot of Brazilian PhDs doing research there. So it's, and when I think about my own program, how I came to Germany, not to study, but to work. And it was a program for engineers in general to go learn the technologies, go back home and make the connection. And we see these numbers. When I say 150 is now, and it's there are other years, right? And so we have some examples. What I can also say is that there have been, since the opening of the airport, 35 up till now, from March up till now, 35 delegations of Brazilians from universities, from the government in all different cities, state, federal government, also business people come, and students coming to Israel to visit and to get to know each other. 35 delegations. This is a lot in 7 months. And more is still coming and programmed for the next year already. So I have here some examples of academic research and development cooperations. And let's begin with the cooperation between the Technion and the ITA. ITA is the Brazilian Aeronautics Institute of Technology, and has the same rank in Brazil as the Technion. And they are doing, for instance, they are building together constellations of satellites, which I don't know, I'm not from the area, but I imagine something really very high tech. Haifa University and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and the Brazilian Marine, they develop joint research in marine science and marine biology.
Okay.
Ben Gurion University, I don't know exactly with which university it has partnerships, but it does this research in desert tech, which is, as I said, important for Brazil. Then there is cooperation in advanced medicine between the Technion and the Albert Einstein Hospital in São Paulo. Another good example is the partnership between the Volcani Center, which is Israel's agricultural research and development center, established before the state of Israel in 1921, with Embrapa, that it's a partner in Brazil, the state-owned Brazilian agricultural research company. So these are some examples.
Sure. Oh, those are a lot of examples. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yes, and I'm sure there is much more than this in doing and coming. And during the Corona time, all these agreements signed in 2019. After that, Corona came. So a lot could not happen, but in this time, I'm sure that the chambers of commerce, the companies, the embassy, they were doing their work to connect the parties, and a lot is going to happen now. And if we go to the level of companies, for instance, I said already, Israeli Rafael and IAI, they have subsidiaries in Brazil with research and development units. They develop joint projects with Brazilian partners. Elbit has a subsidiary in Brazil called Ares. It builds drones for the Brazilian Defense Forces. And these are the examples that I have between companies, but I'm sure there's much more that I couldn't get directly. Anyway, I think what happens the most is in the field of agriculture. And because Israel began as an agriculture country, and Brazil has lots of technology in agri-tech, desert tech, and food tech. Brazil has this huge territory and this mission to feed the world. Both nations see each other with the mission of feeding the world, and they are working together.
Yeah. Well, that's very important because the other breadbasket, the Ukraine and Russia, is very problematic now. And I think wheat and grain is flowing out of the Ukraine now, but there's a big risk that could be shut down. So it's very important that Israel and Brazil work together for worldwide food security.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And then maybe I can say there are two important programs. One in industrial research from the Embrapi, together with the Israel Innovation Authority. They search companies, put them together, and search matchmaking one for the other. And there's also the program Scale Up in Brazil from the Apex, and it's a program happening only in Singapore, Japan, and Israel. They attract the technologies of the companies in these countries, do the matchmaking, the financing, all bringing all the opportunities. It's really
great.
A big world of present and future.
So, in the last couple of easy questions, are there direct flights between Israel and Brazil, right?
Yes.
El Al.
No, direct flights. No, you always have to have one stop and then you fly direct.
So most people go to Europe or the United States first, and then to Brazil.
Yes, to Europe.
Okay, and then what's the time difference between Israel and Brazil?
Depends. Brazil has 3 time zones, but if you take the most important, which are São Paulo, Rio, now we're having 6 hours. Sometimes it depends, 4 hours to 6 hours, depending on the time change.
That's not that much difference.
No,
so it's easier to do business with Brazil.
Yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other issues you wanted to mention that we didn't talk about?
I think I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. It was, for me, it opened my mind to a world I was not aware of, not in this detail. And I'm very happy about the opportunity. I would also like, I want to like the Brazilian ambassador for the time he spent with me, and also the people in his embassy he asked to talk to me. But really, thank you for this fabulous opportunity, because it's something that enriched very much my horizon.
Well, it was a pleasure having you speak to us, Marcia Zeitun Jansen. You did a great job. You taught us a lot about the relationship between Israel and Brazil from historic perspective, cultural perspective, business perspective, technology perspective, and commerce. It was great. We really appreciate your time. And I know you put a lot of research into this. Most of our guests are great, but they don't go through the trouble of talking to the ambassador and, doing a lot of very fundamental research. So we really appreciate that. And for anybody that's listening that needs representation, legal representation on issues dealing with doing business in Brazil, Germany, or Israel, Marcia is a great source to turn to. So anyway, I think we can end the program here. Thank you again, Marcia.
I thank you very much, David. Thank you.